For the past few months, I've been playing WWE 2K24, and I've been holding this review back because I'm always like, well, I haven't tried this part yet. I haven't tried this part yet. And I realized to myself, I'm going to keep delaying this review forever if I don't just get my thoughts out there. I've played the parts that are important to me, and so I want to get my thoughts out there to let you know if I think you should try this game out. Now, a WWE game being good is very important to me because I go by what I call a 2-year plan. Now, while 2K23 definitely had some things going for it, I did wonder if 2K24 was going to be able to reasonably keep that momentum going in terms of quality. So does it? Honestly, WWE 2K24 might be one of the better wrestling games in recent times, definitely stepping up to the plate, and I could compare it to other recent modern games that I quite enjoyed, such as WWE 2K19. It's honestly astounding the recovery job that 2K have done in recent years after the appalling 2K20. WWE 2K22 felt like they were dusting themselves off after that huge calamity and checking what hadn't burnt down in the fire that was Yuke's leaving, and 2K23 and 2K24 felt like they decided to build a bigger and grander experience, seeing as Yuke seemed content with letting the once pristine legacy of the WWE games kind of just stagnates. Like, don't get me wrong, I do love Yuke's and what they did for the WWE games, but in the later years it definitely felt like they'd found a decent holding pattern and weren't doing much beyond that, whereas this has a lot of new things going for it. Now, for those who may be new to wrestling or wrestling games, the general gist is to win, you have to pin your opponent for a free count, make them submit, or you can win by count out or disqualification if you really want, although depending on what match type you have can change the end goal. To get to that point, you have to batter your opponents into submission though. The controls can be a little daunting in the WWE 2K games, as they fall somewhere between Smash Bros. And a regular fighting game, where there are combos you can learn, but nothing ever gets too complex, hence my Smash Bros. Comparison. And once you realise the basics, then experimenting in different areas can be all the more rewarding and, in my opinion, tend to make a lot of sense. Like, once you figure out how the general controls work, figuring out everything else kinda just clicks together. The hardest part really is the reversals, as the days of spamming the reverse button ended long ago, with now you having to learn the timings of each move's reversal window, like each opponent is some sort of Dark Souls boss, which I actually kind of find to be better, as it makes every match tense, but it's actually rewarding if you can get good at reversing opponents, and it makes you feel nigh invincible if you can manage to thwart all of your opponent's offense. Now, the game has introduced several new match types this year, which is honestly a pleasant surprise given how oftentimes the series has been at a bit of a leisurely pace. We may get a new game every so often, such as in 2K23 we got the introduction of War Games, but 2K24 came out of the gate with several notable match types, such as the Gauntlet match, which came in several different flavours. Now, a gauntlet match, for those unaware, is basically an endurance test, typically a run of singles matches back to back where the person who survives till the end wins, or it can be one person who has to survive till the end with the other opponents trying to stop them. Admittedly, this might be my new favourite match type. Normally I'd go for a nice Royal Rumble as my go-to with the Elimination Chamber and War Games taking the silver and bronze, but 2K lets you go wild with 30 wrestlers, and picking the Eliminator style means that you essentially get a Royal Rumble type match, but instead of throwing opponents over the top rope, you go with pinfall and submission rules, which is ultimately my perfect match type when I just want to throw a whole bunch of wrestlers together and just go wild for a bit of time. Especially if you pick to have vitality restored for wrestlers after each fall, meaning that you can have a wrestler that started in the match last all the way to the end. It's still unlikely, of course, that that wrestler will win the whole thing, but it is so exciting to me to watch a wrestler just last that long when I'm just sitting back and watching. And it also gives me a fighting chance when I'm playing myself. They also introduced the ambulance and casket match, which I'm lumping these two together as the general concept for these is basically the same. There's a thing, and you have to shove your opponent into that thing. And when I saw that these were announced, I was certain that there was going to be some sort of ambulance or casket match in WWE's showcase mode for this year, but neither make an appearance, shockingly enough, meaning 2K have kindly once again given us a match type just because it would be nice to have, and truthfully, it is rather nice. There are plenty different ways to utilize the ambulance and casket. You don't just shove your opponent in, you can slam your opponent into them, you can jump off of the ambulance, which is really fun. So they aren't just end goals, and while they're not my favourite matches, it does get a little bit repetitive trying to shove your opponent into the ambulance and into the casket, only for them to break back out and you rinse and repeat until it finally works. I still think it's a nice, unexpected surprise that they're in the games again. The other match that makes a big return is the special referee match, and this match is one I'm torn between wanting to lavish for finally making return and almost being sad because 2K almost made this better than ever before, unfortunately falling at the last hurdle. Let's get the compliments out of the way first. The match is very well fleshed out, with the special referee having complete dominion over the match, being allowed to either play it completely straight or be as screwy as possible, or at least until you get thrown out for bending the rules too much. You can count really quickly or really slowly, you can flat out ignore rules if you so choose. It all makes for a fun little system and something I imagine would work amazingly with friends. The bit that I feel could have made it better than ever before was that 2K actually allowed a pseudo-creator referee mode that on paper would have been sweet. Me and my friends heard that and thought we'd be able to not only allow wrestlers to be referees, but even make a referee from the ground up. So, as you're selecting referees for shows, maybe you could pick a custom referee. Unfortunately, it's not quite like Fire Pro. It's a case of you can allow a wrestler to have an alternate outfit as a referee, which is fine, don't get me mistaken. It's just, it was so close. I love having that feature in Fire Pro, so I would have loved to have seen that in WWE 2K, but I get that I'm probably nitpicking there. Overall, it's still a really good thing to see this match type back. On top of all these new matches, there's been several updates across the board, such as Backstage Brawl now being far more interactive than it has been in years past, which I am so glad about, because it was quite frankly driving me mental how barren the Backstage Brawl was. Heck, I remember when they transitioned from the one from like 2K18 and I think 2K19 to the one we have now, where I actually felt it was a bit of a downgrade because there was less going on. But now it is better than ever before. I've seen wrestlers get thrown through the car, wrestlers could get thrown onto this big light fixture. It's honestly a great time with so many more options. And I love that. And they even carried over the ambulance match mechanics to the ambulance that was in the parking lot. So, again, there's a lot more to do in the Backstage Brawl. They also added even more weapons, which has been nice. 2K22 introduced things such as the hockey stick, the stop sign, and the shovel to the classic options of tables, ladders, chairs, candlestick, baseball bat, and sledgehammer. But 2K24 introduced the guitar, a microphone, and even weapons like La Chancla and a Slim Jim, which gives you even more ways of battering your opponents, which, on top of that, the DLC has added even more weapons on top of that, ones that I didn't expect to see added to a WWE game, such as a door, a light tube, a barbed wire baseball bat. Some of these are weapons that I would have never expected to see appear in a WWE game, given that it typically tries to keep a PG atmosphere, but I am so happy to see that they're willing to push the envelope a bit to allow us to have more options and a better gameplay experience. I mean, you're going to have an ECW pack, then you better be ready to bring the extreme, and they've done that absolutely. Speaking of hardcore, they've actually revised the blood system once again. In 2K19 and pretty much years before that, if wrestlers would bleed, they would all bleed the same and could bleed like they were in a death match. Like, I remember if a match went long enough, wrestlers were coated in the stuff. It was quite grisly. While 2K22 tried to diversify a bit, allowing wrestlers to bleed in different ways. Because every wrestler bled the same way, it could get a bit samey, so they were trying to make it a bit more realistic. But they actually reduced the amount of blood quite substantially, which, if you're smashing a chair over someone's head for an hour, having a little thimble of blood doesn't quite make sense. Well, apparently 2K started watching way too much ECW because they have fully fixed that problem. Not only can wrestlers bleed in different ways, but I have seen utter bloodbaths. You can now bleed on the floor, and I have seen matches that have become absolutely morbid sight. Wrestlers go wrestlers can gush blood everywhere. Now, I gotta say, I do appreciate this level of attention to detail, as morbid as it can be. This is exactly what I'm looking for in a wrestling game, is I'm looking for them to get all of these different little details exactly right. My one big criticism of this update is, for some reason, the women are still just, I guess, vampires or something, because they still are not allowed to bleed, and I do not understand why. I'm sorry, I think women do in fact have veins. I think they are capable of bleeding. I don't know why this is still a thing where the moment you pick to have like women wrestling, the blood option is just instantly turned off. It's a very weird thing. If you're putting all this time and attention over the past few years to update the system, surely you would allow it across all genders, but that's just me. There's also new paybacks, which the WWE games seem to be content on changing every few games. To quickly explain, these are like special abilities that allow you to have a little edge in a match. Think of it like when Undertaker does his sit-up or Hulk Hogan starts hulking up. It's like that essentially. 2K have gone out of the way to try and make sure that each payback is an exciting new addition, and honestly, I think they've done an excellent job here. Fireball itself is pretty self-explanatory. You throw a fireball in someone's face. Freeze is when you do an action which causes your opponent to briefly stop, which, depending on what your animation is, could have them being super intimidated because you've done something really scary, like the Undertaker sit-up, the Bray Wyatt spider walk, or you could be like begging for mercy, which causes them to hesitate, which allows you to get a cheap shot in. To go alongside resiliency, there's now Iron Jaw, which allows you to immediately snap out of being stunned, which is the mechanic they've introduced so you can't just reverse all the time. Meaning if you combine both resiliency and Iron Jaw, you end up with a wrestler that just will not die no matter what. One other curious update, speaking of resiliency, is that it now can't be added to a wrestler unless their overall rating is a certain level, which I imagine was done because resiliency has and will always be the best payback in the game, as it's just a get out of jail free card that lets you kick out of a pinfall or submission no matter how badly you've been beaten. Another new update I like is Rage, which gives you an instant finisher, which is made all the better because now you can have two paybacks once again. Because while Iron Jaw and Resiliency can be great for a wrestler who never dies, Rage and Resiliency is great for a wrestler determined to get results, or using something like Brass Knuckles and Rage can have you cheat and then score a finisher, meaning that you can get little flares to your wrestlers with these combinations. All these different things that allow you to make your own wrestlers have these little unique things to them is something that I absolutely adore. Creating wrestlers is one of my favorite things. We will be getting more into that. And stuff like this really helps just give them a little extra something to make them stand out. One other update that they've done is the super finishers. So for those of you who like to stock up on finishers for a big finisher palooza, or if you're an E-Fed person like myself who was giving these super ultra death finishes to your custom wrestlers, or to those who create a wrestler with a high momentum stat and were getting sick and tired of when your mates would kick out of your finishers, then 2K has the solution for you. Super finishers have been a thing in wrestling for as long as any of us can really remember. Sure, a wrestler has their signature move, which is to set up for their finisher, but sometimes doing a leg drop isn't enough, so the wrestler climbs up to the top rope, takes a deep breath, and hits that top rope leg drop to put away their most worthy adversary. And now you can do this in-game too. To do this, first you have to set up a super finisher if you're creating a wrestler, but assuming your wrestler does in fact have one, you need to stockpile 3 finishers, which is the risk to the reward. Now, assumedly it hits a lot harder when you do connect with a super finisher, but also more importantly, it negates resiliency entirely, meaning no instant kick out, meaning that your opponent has to kick out with the pinfall minigame with no get out of jail free card. It's very difficult to pull off because again, you've got to stock up 3 finishers, but it adds more depth to the gameplay, and I love that there's this way to almost assuredly end any match. It's a lot of work, but absolutely worth the effort. And when you manage to land it, it feels so good. Now before we get into the creation mode, as always, if I want to get creating, I have to beat the showcase mode. And because of that, I generally find this part to be more of an obligation, separating me from the parts that I really want to get to in the game. But I will admit that focusing on 40 years of WrestleMania is far more interesting of a concept to me than the career of a legendary wrestler. Nothing against Rey Mysterio or John Cena, I actually quite like them, but it really is nice to have a change of scenery with different wrestlers rather than seeing Rey Mysterio or John Cena in 20 different matches back to back. Though you will see a few repeat offenders, Hulk Hogan for instance really won't leave me alone in this showcase mode. The amount of matches is on one hand really quite astounding, as it does cover quite a few memorable matches throughout the event's history, such as Andre vs Hogan, Michaels vs Razor, the heist of the century, the streak ending, WrestleMania 17, even the Firefly Funhouse match makes an appearance, which actually shocked me that they managed to translate that into video game form. Although at the same time, the showcase mode does definitely struggle with the balance of quantity versus quality, especially towards the end, because I'm sorry, but Bianca vs Asuka is not as memorable as Cody vs Roman, and I guarantee you it would not have made the list had it been more than a year old. I think my main gripe with Showcase Mode is that sometimes it can get a bit finicky trying to achieve every objective which you 100% have to do, because otherwise it's not even worth bothering if you want to unlock everything of note. Sometimes the challenge can be interesting, but a lot of the time it feels like tedious busy work. So if you want to get the most out of this mode, definitely don't try to beat it in one go like I did. One other weird note is just how long some of these video cutscenes go. For those unaware, oftentimes the matches will be interspersed with footage of the actual match you're replicating, but some of these cutscenes go on for so long that I use them as an excuse to type in most of these review notes. Like, they go on so monstrously long. One time I played through this game mode just to unlock stuff, and I was skipping through most of the video cutscenes, and then I decided to record myself playing through the mode for this review, and because I decided to record the actual cutscene, it took so much longer. Also, don't bother with the bonus match. It's a Royal Rumble with 30 of the wrestlers featured throughout this campaign, and you can pick from 29 of them, with the goal being not only to win but to eliminate 10 wrestlers, which is a third of the entire match, lest we forget. And what do you get for all of your hard work? My faction cards! Christ 2K, why don't you just spit on me if you hold me in such contempt? Just for the record, we are not reviewing My Faction mode. That's one of the two modes that I absolutely am not touching. I don't care about My Faction mode. I don't care about the cards. You can put as many different unlockables in My Faction mode. I am not playing it. Now, I've always championed the Create modes in WWE games because the amount you can do in them is something I find few, if any, games can truly match. And instead of showing footage of me using the Create mode, I just want to scroll through many of the different created wrestlers I've ended up making so far. Not only can you customize the wrestler, the moveset, the general personalities, as well as entrances that you can run through with a fine-tooth comb, you can also sort out their victory animations, finally bringing back the ones where you may even win 2 titles, which the Warrior vs Hogan and Michaels vs Razor matches I imagine forced 2K's hand there. But you can now even create custom crowd signs. It's actually a little stunning just how much you can do in this game, and I didn't even mention create a video, create a championship, and create an arena, which really helps me with my eFed. Easy to say these are the bits I spend the most time on, as I just get a lot of joy playing around with the creation tools. And while 2K rarely does anything to majorly shift the formula, the gradual improvements always help, and they did finally add a major change to create a moveset, with you now being allowed 5 finishing moves and 5 signature moves, which honestly really does change a lot. Over time, they've added 50 different ways of using particular moves, and it feels so much more natural if the wrestlers that I create have these different ways of being able to do it. For instance, I have a wrestler called Hanch who uses the label lock, and now he can pull out that move in so many different ways. Or another wrestler of mine, Ace, that I've been using my eFed, has over time found so many different ways of ending matches over time anyway, so now that I can actually add those moves as signatures and finishes, it just feels right. It opens up so many more possibilities and allows me to be even more creative with the wrestlers, which I adore. Again, the WWE games are one of the leading game series in terms of creation options, in my opinion. There's a lot of great creation options in different games, but I still struggle to find many options that truly can match the WWE games in the level of depth that you can truly get away with. Now, to tell you the truth, I don't have a lot to say about my GM mode. if there's been some major changes, I didn't pay enough attention. It's still fine. It's just maybe not the most interesting mode to me. And I haven't played My Rise simply because I'm, again, just not that terribly interested in the story. Maybe sometime in the future I'll do like a part 2 where I review these different modes a little bit more in depth. Anyway, in conclusion, with how good 2K24 is, it does leave me pondering a few things. Can the games really keep up this kind of pace year on year? Or will we see 2K25 be more going back to the old standard of just making sure things are marginally better? I want to hope that this is bringing in a new era where we can finally once again expect big additions to the games like we used to have. I guess my doubt is because even Ukes, as much as I love them, definitely did struggle to make meaningful updates towards the end, and as big as 2K is, games are getting more complex, so I am a little bit uncertain if they can really keep up this level of progress year on year. Suffice to say, while it may be early days, I am fairly confident in adding this to my slowly growing list of favourite wrestling games of all time. So far it joins the likes of SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, SmackDown vs Raw 08, WWE 2K19, and Fire Pro Wrestling World, making 5 games. I promise I've played way more than this, but I don't know which ones I would put in my Wrestling Game Hall of Fame besides these so far. If you want to see this list finally grow, then join me as I'll eventually review more and more wrestling games, past, present, and future. If you've found yourself enjoying any of the past WWE games within the past decade or so, then I would 110% recommend giving this a go. It is a brilliant improvement over what we got even last year. I think that the 2K series is in good hands, and I cannot wait to see what we get in the future. If it continues at this pace, then 2K25 and 2K26 are going to somehow be even better, which is crazy to think about. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review of WWE 2K24. Even with the fact that I didn't review My Rise, My GM, and My Faction, this review is one of my longer ones, easily, and that's just because I love these games so much, and I hope you really could tell that through this review. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like. This channel's a bit of a smaller one, so these reviews do have a harder time getting out there in the YouTube algorithm, so leaving a like, a comment, that can really help out a whole lot. I'd love to get these reviews, some more eyes on these reviews. If there are games you'd love to see me check out, then absolutely feel free to let me know. I only have so much spare time, but I'd love to check out some recommendations. Thank you so much, and I will see you all next time.